All right, button pressing has commenced. Here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. Welcome to anyone who is new here today. Everyone else, what's up? How's it going? I don't know about anyone else, but things certainly took a turn this week. I don't know anybody else who's listening on a regular, who's here with me every week. Did something happen for you with the turn of this new year during this last week? 'Cause certainly happened for me. I don't mean to project on anybody else, but something shifted. And I gotta say, shifted for what feels like rocky terrain. I don't even know where to begin. I suppose the most important obvious place for me to begin is that I had my first major pain flare up in a long while. I think it's been maybe 6 or 7 months, maybe even a little bit longer, like at least 6 months, 7 months since I had any major pain flares. And if you have listened to this show long enough, you know that I've had them in the past, and sometimes they've even been quite debilitating. And I've been really doing good when it comes to like managing stuff and like not having these like major pain flares where I feel like I'm kind of like knocked down. But this week I had one and it felt like it came out of nowhere. I definitely didn't do anything physically to trigger it off. Like I would have known. And I know the exact moment I felt when it happened. I felt that spot in my body. And then I knew it right away. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe it just happened. And I knew like right when it first I first feel it, it doesn't take on its full form, but like within the next 30 minutes to the rest of that day, I could feel it fully develop. And then now here I am. It's been a day or two with it. And I do know how to like manage it. It's not the first time I've had this happen. But in the past, I felt like I could sometimes identify like more practical things like, oh, I'm not sleeping enough, or I'm like not eating good, or I'm pushing my body too hard, or, there's like when I'm not doing the things I feel like I need to do to take care of my body, and then I have a pain flare up, I say, oh, well, it's because I didn't do this and I did this, and that's what I think led to the pain flare up. But in this instance, it doesn't explain it. It feels like it kind of came out of nowhere, at least in the moment when it happens. But it doesn't come out of nowhere, you see. It's not because of like some tissue damage in my body or because of like some thing that I did, like some demand I placed on my body that it couldn't meet. It's some subtler expression of something in my system. I think like we've talked about pain patterns here on the show, it feels like it's a pattern, but unlike that guy, what's his name? Olderman, Keith Olderman, maybe a guy who's on the show. Maybe you guys remember. He seemed to talk about the pain pattern sometimes as a much more just like purely biomechanical thing about the glide of your femur bone. And for me, this is not that. It's clearly something deeper. And as I've been reflecting on it all day, because the pain's there and it makes me have to reflect on it, I can see that, I've really got over some pretty big hurdles over the last 6 months, and I really have managed to navigate like really stressful, difficult choices and like a lot of hard work in a relatively contented way, like without like freaking out. Like if you remember when I said I was going to do the center, my goal was to like not have it be this like crazy anxiety spiral, but to really go about the endeavor with the same kind of equanimity that I'm looking to cultivate in my practice. And I felt like I've been quite successful in that over the last 6 months. So to then like out of nowhere have my body just kind of like tweak out and like someone like putting their thumb down saying, nope, you're going to lay down for a while now. It seems to me that it has to do with that there's like a little space right now where like this needs to be expressed, because the truth is there's a lot of difficulty in front of me. You know, a few weeks ago with the check-in, I was talking about the numbers with the center and whatever. And earlier today, my wife and I had to have that conversation, that one where you sit down together and you look at the bank accounts and you try to come up with a plan. And, you know, it's daunting. And, you know, not only that, yet again, I find myself in a bureaucratic black hole with my daughter's health insurance every year. If you were here this time last year, I was talking about the same thing. And this year, it's the worst it's ever been in terms of just sort of like people just making mistakes and people not caring and the whole system being utterly inhumane. And it just feeling like so much is stacked against you. Just trying to like live a modest life, you know. So it's just been rough. It's been a rough week, and it feels like it took a kind of a sharp turn. And really, you know, on some level, as much as like it's not a desirable experience, I don't like the way it feels. It also does something. It also has a sort of function, it seems to me. It makes my mind have to relate to things and people in a different way because of it. And I don't know, that's a sort of like, I try to look for that. I try to look for what's the, not lesson. I don't like that. I don't like, oh, you're being taught a lesson. I don't think of it that way, but that there's like a function. There's some, I don't know, there's something more to just suffering, like suffering has a function or something. In any case, I'm slipping deep into the spirals of inquiry and into the nature of things. And that is actually very much the topic of discussion today with my guest, Sally Bassett. And as you will hear, Sally is a bit of a wild card episode, as I like to call them, where it kind of came seemingly out of nowhere, and it was a little bit random that we ended up coming together. But as per usual, it seems to have served an important purpose in this moment. And Sally has an interesting career and life that she's lived, and it was wonderful to get to know her a bit. I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me ask that if you have been listening to this show and you feel like you're getting something from it, maybe you would consider supporting it by becoming a podcast premium subscriber. For as little as $5 a month, you can make a big difference in helping me continue to do this. And it's the way that I am able to keep doing it without having to put ads on. And you get access to the full length archives. So again, if you're in a position to do so, perhaps you'll consider supporting with the podcast premium subscription. Also, if you would like to connect with me in other ways, there's lots of opportunities for us to do that. There's ongoing live classes and a weekly discussion group. There's on-demand videos. All of the stuff, podcast premium and the rest, can be found at jbrownyoga.com. Okay, y'all, we will leave it there. I'll touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Sally Bassett. Hello?
Hi, Sally here.
Hi, Sally. I'm Jay. Nice to meet you.
Jay, nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me today.
Oh, it is my pleasure. And I don't know if you're familiar with the show. I am already recording. So if it's okay with you, I'd like for us to consider ourselves having just begun. Would that be all right?
That sounds great with me.
Very good. Well, Sally, this is what I would sometimes refer to as a bit of a wild card episode.
Okay.
And the reason being because I don't know much about you. And the reason why you're here is a bit random. You sent me an email about your new book.
I did.
And I, put it in a file like I do when they come in. And then sometimes when it's time to schedule episodes, I go into the file and I just whatever sort of pops out at me sometimes, or sometimes if I have like an own personal thread of something I'm looking into that connects with whatever that person's talking about.
Well, that's called a God thing.
Well, you see, you went right there, Sally. But what I was going to say is that you have a newer book that came out called Spiritual Transformational Yoga, which we can talk about. But that really wasn't the initial thing that got me. The initial thing was you wrote a different book years ago called Yoga Through Christ.
Yes. And this is a revised book, has much of the same beliefs I had, but I also believe it's more than just for Christians. But anyway, yoga to me is a very spiritual, flow. It's a spiritual experience. And a lot of people come to the mat for the physical thing, but then they find out it's so much more. It's not just physical, but it's emotional and social. And then they get to the spiritual thing if they give it time. And it's just an amazing practice, and a lot of people, when I first started, training in 2002, a lot of people, thought it was against the religion, and they just thought, it was, it's from India, and, it was against everything they believed in. Well, it's not a religion. It's really complements every religion, but it especially complements mine as a Christian.
Mm. Well, I mean, that's interesting. I think that's true that yoga is not specifically a religion, but there's certainly expressions of yoga that are like more compatible or less compatible with Christian beliefs, maybe. And I guess the more important thing is a lot of us, and this is where it kind of comes from for me, a lot of us rebelled against like the Judaism and Christianity of our parents. And the rebelling of that was going to yoga. So within yoga, like there's a lot of, a lot of baggage around specifically Christ or Jesus Christ. And, for myself personally, I have been exploring Jesus and the Bible just in my own inquiry. And I do so from a perspective of not growing up with Christianity, but I always say, like, I look at the Bible in the same way that I look at Patanjali's Yoga Sutras.
That's good.
But I will say that, even someone listening to this right now, I know some listeners, they don't like it when I talk about Jesus Christ at all, because they really associate Christ and Christianity with like bad experiences they had with like the nuns that were horrible to them or something,
Well, they need to just kind of put that behind and start fresh, because that's why, in my book, but to me, the main focus of yoga, Patanjali, is the 8 limbs of yoga. If they just start with that, Jay,
yeah,
the 8 limbs, the first 2 are just social and personal observances. Like I call them the 10 commandments. Just really before, and when I teach teachers to be teachers of yoga, I always get them off the mat and just say they need to commit to truth and nonviolence. And then on the other hand, contentment and letting go and non-greediness and moderation. And then once you have those values, then you get on the mat. Only one of the 8 is the postures. And then you get into the breath work, which is almost more important than the postures. It's, good for healing. It's good for energizing, focus. And then you go a little bit deeper and you start withdrawing from your senses on the mat and you go within. And if you just totally are open to what comes, the next you're, I like to believe it's the inner focus between your, you call it the third eye, and you see Jesus, or you see your higher source, whatever that is for you. Mm. And then if you just stay focused and then just be, that's, what it's all about. Just be. And then the eighth limb of yoga, you go to the crown of your head and you have this beautiful, blissful state with your higher source, with God, with Jesus, just the shining light energy going from your crown of the head up to the heavens. And I know I just said that briefly, but it is just a process that you can get closer to God without worrying about what you grew up with or whatever. Just have that personal relationship and just open your heart and you get answers. Prayer is talking to God, but meditation is what we do in the eight limbs of yoga. You listen to God and you get answers for your life and you get healing and you get energized and you get focus and goals. So to me, it's as simple as that, is just focusing on the eight limbs of yoga without making it more complicated, not worrying about Sanskrit words, not worrying about the poses, but also yoga is not about the outer work and outer work, workout. It's an inner workout. It's truly going within. Does that make sense?
It certainly does. And it certainly is what my experience has been. Exactly what you described, that the practice facilitated some sort of inner quietude that also kind of opens you up to what I do think has led to a personal relationship with God. Now, different people have different ways of talking about higher power, and I've had a number of different conversations with people on the show about that. But I think it's certainly been the case that my yoga has led me to inquiring into God. And the role of Jesus is just about kind of understanding, like I always say, we live in a time defined by Jesus, so to just write him out like he's not part of it seems crazy to me.
It does.
But you know what I would say also that is interesting, because I want to put a pin in this moment that we dove right into the depth of yoga and belief in God. I guess one of the other threads of this show has a lot to do with the way that yoga has happened in the West over the years. And I did read that you owned several centers over many years and then sold them. I did too. I had one for 10 years that I sold in 2017. And I guess I'm kind of curious to set a little oral history about you and what your kind of trajectory has been with yoga. I know you didn't necessarily start out with yoga. You had like a whole other career, I believe, as like a flight attendant and then like a CEO of an airlines. Is that right?
Yeah, I've had a tremendous career and started out at 20 as a flight attendant and just 6 months later started leading trips all over the world and ended up going to over 120 countries. And I have not stopped. I'm leading quite a few trips this year and into next. But 9/11 came and it was stressful for everybody. But being a CEO in management of a travel company as a subsidiary of an airline was pretty stressful. And I just signed up for yoga teacher training. And I was also a single mom, but I just know I needed that. I was looking for it. And I think everybody comes to the mat looking for something, whether it's a divorce, a death, or whatever. Maybe they think they're coming for the physical reason, but eventually it goes a lot deeper. So did the teacher training and literally opened my studio in the middle of one of the largest parks in the United States, looking over the water of a reservoir on January 1st of 2003. And immediately at that same time frame started a foundation called peacethroughyyogafoundation.org. And because of my background, I wanted to intermingle them all. I wanted to be able to offer yoga and adventure trips. And you're not going to believe this, Jay, but a few months later, I decided to go back to Purdue and get my doctorate on the whole thing of volunteerism, taking people around the world so they could work in an afternoon or a couple days in an orphanage or a school or a hospital. And I started mixing the three things. And I eventually left the airline in about 2005 and been doing this, just focused on it. And had 30 great years with one company. And then since then, just literally offering these trips where it's about yoga, but it's also about getting out of your comfort zone and zip lining or climbing Atlas Mountains in Morocco or hiking you've got to do that sometime, Jay, if you've never done it, the Camino de Santiago, where St. James, the apostle, walked 500 miles and we walked the last 70. But then at the same time, if we're in a destination that has a need like Costa Rica, we started a school there, and we built our own building last year, and it's called Girls for Success. But I think it all goes together. And if your audience doesn't know, it's more than the physical practice, as I've said before, but going into a studio, it's also about karma yoga. Karma is giving back. So as a yogi, I think everybody should find their own cause. And for me, it's been through travel and being able to connect people when they go out of the country.
Well, I'm curious about the moment where you decided to make the life change, not just because that's an interesting moment in a person's life, but in history, like it was like a big narrative. I remember reading an article in the New York Times about people giving up their corporate jobs to become yoga teachers. But I guess I'm curious because you mentioned 9/11, and I had a note here that at one point you were an ambassador to somebody in Yugoslavia or something, that you had some connection to the Arab world. Is that why 9/11 was particularly impactful for you and what you were doing at that time?
9/11 was just stressful period, just trying to fill planes and cancel trips and everything. It actually started before that, Jay, because I was, like I said, 20 when I started this journey. And I look back one day around 1998. So it was actually before my yoga teacher training. And I sat there one Sunday and the aha moment came, well, what were my favorite trips? And I look back at all my times and I remember having a full plane charter go to Honduras. And I'm taking people to banana plantations, Copan ruins. But on the plane, there was like 30 doctors. And they say, Sally, when you're free, if you want to come over, we're putting eyeglasses on people that wouldn't have access to being able to have a doctor look at them and get glasses. And we carried them on our plane. And I loved that experience. There were thousands of people. And then a few years later in Haiti, same thing. Hard to believe we actually went to Haiti for vacation, but the rest of the plane was, and I had a group of doctors, same thing, Sally, come over, and I had chickens around my ankles in this little hut watching the doctors examine, and I would try to help with their triage. So I started offering trips. And I thought, well, let's just see if we get 30 people on a kind of a volunteerism thing. That's why I ended up getting my doctorate in that. And we filled a jet. People liked the idea of not necessarily a church mission, not sleeping on a church floor. We would stay at 4 and 5-star hotels, go to Puerto Vallarta, have a great time, but during their stay, they'd go work in an orphanage. Or in that case that you brought up in Serbia, the crown prince and princess of Serbia, his father was king of Yugoslavia, and he hadn't even been in the palace for a few years, came to Indianapolis, and we ended up taking people over there and filling jets with things that they needed. There was so much need in the 90s. We had our own airplane. I could fill the belly of the plane with wheelchairs and crutches and even mattresses or clothing or whatever they needed. So it's been exciting. And then after 9/11, I started doing, like I said, 2002, 2005, the few years started to offer the yoga. And that's when like at lunches, I would go out for a walk and I'm like, am I really thinking about giving the big bucks up as my position?
Yeah, I read that your family and friends were shocked that you decided to resign from your position. What was going through your mind and what made you decide? Was there something that happened in particular, like I'm done, or like, why do you decide to give up like a good job for a yoga career, which at that time was, I guess there was a lot of hype about yoga careers, but the reality is that you can't make as much money at yoga as you could at what you were doing. That's for sure.
Well, I had 2 yoga centers by the time, or one for sure by the time I left. It wasn't leaving.
Oh, so you had already opened yoga centers before you left your gig?
I opened one in 2000 on January 1st, 2003, and I left December of 2005. So it wasn't, those 3 years were the time I'm like, I'm ready to do this full time. I'm ready to do trips that are yoga and adventure and service. And I did. And I remember telling my daughter, who was in college, and she goes, I have to go upstairs. I need to think about this. I said, nothing will change, honey. And of course, the next day I had to tell her the housekeeper was going, but nothing really changed. I think you live on what you make. It is amazing when you look back. You just do it. And I went from 6 figures to 30,000, raising my own money and then getting the staff again and things like that. But it's all been really a great part of the journey. I have no regrets, and it's always just kind of worked. My biggest challenge right now is always trying to come up with new destinations. But what I'd like, Jay, I wanted to bring up is when I've gone, to me, it's a spiritual thing and that's a personal thing. But I did take a group like a year ago to Morocco, and there's such a great, the Muslims have a beautiful religion. They're praying 5 times a day. It's, it's a very safe country. It was beautiful. And I got to know so many people. We went into a women's center where they were abused. We had to, it was confidential where we were going. It happened to be Ramadan that day, and they wouldn't have celebrated. A lot of them were hiding from their family or ashamed because they had babies. There were like 3 babies born that week. And I had a few people that were Christians. Well, they're going to hell or whatever. And I thought, it's not about judging. It's just about if you get on the mat. I'm not saying I had anybody in that country get on the mat, but we talked about yoga and just finding time to go within and meditate. And if people just do that, then they go a little further. Does that, hopefully that makes sense?
No, it totally makes sense. I guess I'm curious, when you opened your yoga center in 2003, where was that?
It's beautiful. I'm based in Zionsville, Indiana, but just literally 10 minutes is one of the largest city parks in the United States. It's all a couple lakes. It's on a reservoir. And I was in my training like in November 2002 walking, and there's a Peace Learning Center for kids. It's an old building right on the lake. And I was going through the woods and I'm going, what am I going to do with this training? And I just walked in and said, I'd like to use it nights and weekends around my corporate job. And we're going to call it Peace Through Yoga. And we had it from 2003 till 2014. And I opened another one here in Zionsville and sold it. And, unfortunately during COVID, they disappeared, but Peace Through Yoga Foundation, my foundation, was always separate from the yoga studios. So I teach here in Blossom Yoga here in Zionsville, and don't miss owning studios, but the foundation, I don't miss that part. But I teach, I'm there every day, at least 5-6 days a week when I'm in town. But I love teaching. And when I'm on a yoga trip, like I'm leading a group, 22 women next month to Dominica, beautiful little island between Martinique and Guadeloupe. I'll teach 1 to 2 times a day, and then we'll hike one of the highest mountain peaks in the Caribbean, and then Costa Rica. It's so fun to do these retreats because you can go deeper. You can talk about the 8 limbs, like one limb class, or you can talk about the chakras, which I love. Do you know Sean Korn? I don't know if she's been on your show before. Sure.
She's been on the show before. I've met her. Yes.
Yeah, well, Sean called years ago, back probably before 2005. She goes, Sally, I hear you do humanitarian trips and you teach yoga. Will you set up a trip for me And they all have to pay $20,000. I said, well, Sean, why not $10,000? Nope, if they want to go, they got to pay $20,000. So I set up a trip to Cambodia. That was her first trip. Flew over, met Scott Neeson, who used to be the president of 20th Century Fox, and he said, have you seen poverty? And I said, well, I think I have. I go to Haiti, go to all these places. I go to Africa. I've been in Kenya during the revolution. And he goes, well, let's follow me. And we ended up in the worst dump in the world, where he was taking out a child at a time. And he quit his job after visiting there on vacation. And he went home for a year and kept thinking about it. And I thought, boy, I've been there, kept thinking about it. And he literally sold all his houses and toys and cars and ended up in Cambodia thinking he'd have 30 kids. And now he has literally thousands. So Sean and I took the group over there, 20 people, and we gave him close to $300,000 back there after all expenses were paid. And the next year, South Africa. So she was part of this also journey that I've always done, is trips like that. Hers was just a little bit more expensive, but it was awesome to be able to raise that kind of money and build a bakery in South Africa and then India and different places.
So maybe that's it. Maybe that's what motivates the turn when you see that kind of inequity in the world and that kind of poverty. I know the one time I traveled outside of the United States, or I've traveled a lot of times now, but the first time I traveled to India and saw different levels of poverty, it certainly changed my conception of what it was to be American and what it was to like value things, like where you place your value, the value in things.
I think that's probably one of my favorite things to still do after decades in the industry is just, I love leading the trips. I love seeing people just totally amazed. Just came back from a couple weeks ago to a little island in Belize. We were the only ones on this little island. It's called St. George's Key. And I had about 22 people, 24. And that's high. A lot of times 16, even 8 going to Portugal next year. So they're all, but we had the whole island 1 mile long and about 2 blocks wide. And I love seeing them come to yoga and see their body changes. I love seeing them, the awe of snorkeling or going to another island. People that don't travel, and sometimes you can't, you're not interested or whatever, it does open your eyes. And I'm not taking, I have taken people obviously to Haiti, or Sean and I did a trip to Uganda. I've taken groups there, Kenya. We're not going to the heavy duty places. But if you can make a difference, like even going to Dominica next month, I've done like 5 times in the last few years. We've taken over 1,000 books and started a library. Well, before we did our first trip in 2002, January, they had 2 major hurricanes, I think 17 and 19. They had no books on the island. And now they have a community that has a library, and the kids take turns. So if you can just have a small group of people carry one extra piece of luggage with books, school supplies, clothes, whatever they need, it makes a difference. And yeah, people say, well, Sally, why aren't you doing more in the United States? Well, actually, it's harder to do things in the United States. I can walk into any place that has needs in another country, but you still vet it. We're going to India in March, and we're going, okay, what exactly do you need? We've been there before, and it's Ramada's garden where destitute kids end up there. What do you need? And she'll give us a list of vitamins or whatever the current need is.
I mean, I really appreciate you sharing these things that you're doing. I mean, I remember someone saying in the past, like, if you want to do yoga, feed somebody, like if you want to have your yoga be about truly helping people, then have it be about truly helping people. Now, that's not to say teaching people breathing and moving exercises and helping all people is not also valuable, but interesting to hear you talk about these trips. I suppose that's contrast. I mean, is that contrasted with having the yoga center? Like, what was the yoga scene like in the town that you were in Indiana for those 10 years, like from 2003 to whatever you said, 2014? I imagine things evolved over the years. I certainly saw it. Like when you started out, you probably weren't necessarily doing memberships, but when you closed, you probably were. I guess I'm kind of curious what's your perspective on the way that the business of yoga kind of happened over the years. Because a lot of people sold their centers and just went online or doing retreats like you're doing. And part of that's because of like shifts in the industry and stuff. So I'm curious what did you see with your yoga center? What was it like to have the place? What was the yoga scene like in your town?
Well, that's funny because there wasn't much on the side of town that I offered it, but it was in the most beautiful park. You had to pay to get in or whatever. And so the nights I had to have a key to get people out. But beautiful old building. I think it was owned by the Lilly family here. Hardwood floors, fireplace. It was just beautiful, overlooking the water. But what's really funny is, of course, I didn't have computers, and we did index cards in a file box. And
punch cards, right? Punch cards.
Exactly. And it was honor system, 10 classes for $100. Leave the check in the, so it wasn't about money then. But, so then by the 14, when I opened, I think it was 2012 when I opened my second one right here on Main Street in Zionsville, cute little town. Then it was computers and the whole bit. But where I teach now, and it's the community. I wish and hope for everybody that is a yoga owner and also for yoga students that they have the community that we have. People can pay $139, unlimited classes for the month. People come every day. They're my best friends. They are my family. And many of them travel with me, but it's home to go to a yoga studio and to be able to know people. And my daughter oldest daughter lives in Connecticut, and I go out there and I love to be pushed, and it's a little bit more physical, but there is not that community as much. I'm sure there is with few of them, but they go in, work out, they're there to work out. We are there, and all the teachers are great. They all teach such, lovely practices that touch the heart and soul. Mm. And I hope that for everybody. And I know not all communities have it. I know we're hoping to open another studio close by in another community here that doesn't have anything. I'm going to be co-leading another yoga teacher training next year that's needed. So I think we oversaturated the market with yoga teachers, and then COVID hit and many studios closed. And I hope to see more studios come back and do it for the right reasons.
Well, I opened a place 3 months ago.
Good for you.
I swore I would never do it again. And then I opened a really small place here in my neighborhood for the same reason that you just said, because I wanted to have that again. I wanted to have a yoga center where I knew people.
It's everything. And I know people say that about their church too, but it's just wonderful. And people are like-minded and they're there for the right reasons.
Yeah. If you're there for the right reasons, which is interesting, what we might mean by right reasons.
Well, I do want to say, when you asked what was it like, I do want to point out that was 2003. I told you I had a beautiful sign, Peace Through Yoga, and I put it at the front of the park, and then the other entrance of the park, which is a couple miles apart, and it said Peace Through Yoga right in front of the gate. And they would be thrown in the woods, because back then, Peace Through Yoga, or yoga in general, was a taboo for many Christians. And I think we've come a long way. And
was it like a Christian town? Was everybody there Christians?
No, it's not necessarily that. I think, it's well-rounded, and we have a beautiful interfaith center. But for some reason, I did have a few people come in, well, tell me about this yoga. It's against my religion. So, when you go through teacher training, not all teacher training, and you can tell me yours, we had to do a major paper at the end of the 200 hours.
What was the training that you did?
Well, I did the Y2 yoga teacher training 200 with a lovely teacher. And my friends, we're still friends. Here it is 23 years later. And somebody did it on Kundalini. They're teaching Kundalini every Thursday at the studio where I go. And I go, Another gal teaches more of an Iyengar. She was at my teacher training. I just love that.
You got the spread of all the different styles, right? Me too.
My gosh. So important. It feeds my soul. But what I did my paper on, because it was so important to me, was called Yoga Through Christ, which, years later I did a book on it with the 8 limbs of yoga. But I just researched, is it against it? And then, Jesus disappeared for like 12 years.
Yes, they say he might
have been in India and meditating. Yeah. So I felt good about it. But I was always aware of it. And one gal did drop out of our teacher training back then because she thought it was against her religion. So I think we've come a long way with that, which is what you're exploring now. Where's it fit with your...
Did you grow up in a Christian house?
I did. Presbyterian.
And were your folks like concerned about you getting into yoga? Did they have concerns about it?
No, we weren't like conservative Christian. It wasn't any rules. It was just something that I grasped. My parents weren't worried about it at all. Yeah.
All right. Well, then that makes me curious about, I read that you co-founded a yoga and spirituality program at a Christian theological center in Indiana?
Yes.
When did that happen?
Well, I've been teaching at Butler. You know how you do those physical well-being classes for 1 credit. So I was teaching at Butler for about 5-6 years, and that was really great. And then I noticed the students.
So wait, you were teaching yoga at Butler University? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was called Yoga and Philosophy. So I started there during this whole journey of me doing the travel, whatever. I teach on Monday afternoon. I have 2 back-to-back classes, and it's still going on. A friend of mine's teaching it now.
How did you get that gig? How did you get a gig at a university?
I knocked on their door.
Wow. You're like, I'm a yoga teacher. Do you want me to teach classes?
No, I think you should offer this. I think it would be good for your students. And you offer fly fishing, and you offer dance class. It's that 1 credit that every student has to take.
Yeah.
But I'll go on to CTS, Christian Theological Center, in a second. But what I noticed was the students at Butler, and I'm speaking for other universities, when I first started, it was about teaching them 8 limbs of yoga and the chakras and all the things I love to teach and believe in. But eventually they started getting so stressed out, it was before 9/11, and they get stressed out, and that I totally changed. And we started journaling and doing a lot more breath work and just kind of a different thing. But anyway, I did my book, Yoga Through Christ. And as I finished it, I was like, let me give some more credentials behind or more background. So I signed up to take classes. I didn't know if I'd get a degree at Christian Theological Seminary. And I loved the classes. It was, like introduction, just Christianity. It was the New Testament, the Old Testament, Christianity versus Judaism. But what I found, it's all academic. I don't know what I thought, because I've been in a lot of monks. I've stayed at monasteries. I've traveled the world and followed monks around. And I just love the whole spirituality. I've danced with Native Americans. I just really want to grasp the spirituality of different religions. But there, I loved it. And I like CTS, but I didn't feel a spirituality. So I went once again to my advisor and I said, why don't we teach a yoga and spirituality and pray and learn about meditation? And she actually she had actually gone through yoga teacher training. She did it more for a gentle yoga, chair yoga, just more of like a Tai Chi. She loved the movement. So we did that and brought another gal out, and we mixed the two. The first semester, you have to take 3 semesters to actually become a teacher. But the first semester had about 30 people in that were learning about yoga and spirituality. But then the second semester, summer semester, it would be those who want to be a teacher. So it would get down to about 15 or 10. And then in the fall, we'd finish it up. So if they stayed all 3 semesters, they would actually get their yoga teacher training. But the first class in general was just to bring the two together. And I loved teaching it. What I thought was funny, I was so happy because I thought, well, we can talk about God in this class. You don't do that in a public place. And then about 3 weeks into the class, I realized, they have a whole other program for counseling that are not going to be necessarily ministers or pastors or youth ministers or whatever. And so they weren't Christians. They had agnostics and atheists. We had the best conversations about yoga and spirituality. So it was great. And it's gone 5 or 6 years, and the gal's taken sabbatical. And I've just traveled too much to carry it on the last 2 years. And a friend of mine's carried it on. So it's been a fun journey. And I'm excited about doing yoga teacher training again next year at the studio here locally and bring it all in together.
I guess I'm curious about yoga at the seminary. Is there, I don't know what kind of, what sort of approach you were learning in your training or anything? Was there like chanting involved? Did you do any kind of Sanskrit chanting or anything? Or was that not part of what your practice was?
Well, with yoga teacher training, you have to follow the guidelines anyway. You have to have so much, of the anatomy, so much of the history and the philosophy and the whole bit. So we had to do that. But because it was in a Christian seminary, we actually read a lot more spirituality books like Thomas Merton. So we brought in philosophers of the Christian thinking of meditation. And so they had a lot more reading because they had to read, if they stayed the second and third semester, then we'd get into the actual functioning of yoga and the poses and alignment. But yes, it was a mixture of meditation, contemplation, Christianity. But I do love Kundalini that I do try to do every Thursday, where we do bring in the chanting. Have you tried Kundalini? Are you a Kundalini?
I mean, I have done Kundalini yoga practice, but honestly, I think that, Bhastrika breathing practices, which a lot of Kundalini exercises are rooted in as an example, can be useful practices. But, all kinds of stuff have come out about Kundalini yoga and its origins and Yogi Bhajan and, a lot of it. I mean, I know people have gotten a lot of benefit from it, but for me, I guess I'm interested in the sort of the ways in which yoga practice is presented, because sometimes yoga is presented in a somewhat like secular way, like this is just to calm your mind, or just like mindfulness as a way to like make the job force more productive, whatever,
Yeah.
So the idea that yoga practice is inherently kind of pointing towards deep spiritual questions and ultimately questions of God, which again, a lot of people sort of go to yoga because they don't want to have sort of like the gods of their parents' religions, like I was saying. But I do think it has to do more with one's sense of self and one's relationship to life. And I guess it's just interesting to me in terms of, yoga being a vehicle for one's faith and yoga allowing for there to be lots of different faiths.
And that's exactly, yeah. And it needs to be for all faiths. And it's been fun to talk about that at the Faith Institute here in Indianapolis. I've been involved in just sitting around with all different religions, the Sikhs, the Muslims. And if you just even look at the last three limbs, forget the physical practice, the last three limbs of yoga.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.